Overture. Mayor Pro Tem Motts.
I'm here.
Mayor Wright.
Here.
All present.
Turn over to City Manager for the item on unfunded liabilities.
Thank you, Mayor, members of the City Council. This is our second study session tonight, so I appreciate your patience with wanting us to go over some important items. And this item has to do with unfunded liabilities. And our Finance Director, Don Merchant, has put together a report that addresses where we've been in the last 5 years and where we're projected to go in the next 2 years related to this important subject. And as she'll explain, there's several aspects to Antioch's unfunded liabilities, and there's a lot of things that are out of our control as far as where these numbers are going. Also with us tonight is Dane Hutchings, who's a legislative representative with the League of California Cities. And so he is, from the league standpoint, who represents over 450 cities in the state of California. He has his finger on the pulse of what's happening in the state, what's happening with CalPERS. And so he is prepared to give a brief presentation to you all tonight, and he's going to be available to ask questions as well. So I'll turn this over to Dawn so she can get started, and we just want to get through this rather quickly so you can ask any questions you'd like to.
Good evening, Mayor and Council members. I'm just going to briefly go through the staff report I prepared, and then I'm going to turn it over to Dane to give his presentation. He has a PowerPoint. That way he can explain the pensions crisis just a little bit more in detail. I know we've been talking about it for the last couple of years. What I would like to point out on my report, as you can see on page 1, the historical unfunded liability balances going from June 30th, 2013 through June 30th, 2018. As you can see, our pension and OPEB, which is our other post-employment medical after retirement benefits, have more than doubled through that time. And that really is a function of changes in discount rates, actuarial assumptions, mortality rates, investment losses in the CalPERS system, just a whole bunch of factors that are really out of the city's control. Last year, if you recall, we had brought forth an item for council discussion regarding setting up a Section 115 trust. At that time, council did not want to proceed with that option and stuck with our one-time revenue policy, which put a minimum of 50% of those revenues towards our unfunded liabilities. And the council had focused on paying off the police supplementary retirement plan, which last year was paid off at June 30th, 2018. Because of all these factors I've mentioned, it came back to the tune of $145,013, as you can see at the table on the front page. So I've listed some available options, which is exploring the 115 trust again, a fresh start amortization period, which you sign a contract with CalPERS to restart all your bases on a new 20-year amortization period or less. Samples of those are attached to the report, or a soft fresh start, which would essentially the city would pay the difference, pretending it had signed a contract to do the new amortization period, but pay the difference. That way, if funds aren't available in a particular year, you don't have to pay that. And I've also outlined on page 2 contribution rates for the current year and the next 2 fiscal years that will be coming up. And as you can see, our rates are going up significantly due to items in the pension pipeline coming up, particularly with changes in the discount rate that are going to be funneling through in the next couple years. But with that, I'm going to turn it over to Dane. He has a PowerPoint here, and he can explain a little bit more about the pension crisis, what league recommendations are, etc., and then of course be available for questions after. And then we were seeking some direction from council to kind of incorporate the budget, what you're looking at or what you want to bring back for further discussion. So Dane, with that, I turn that over to you.
Thank you. Good evening. My name is Dane Hutchings. I'm with the League of California Cities. I've been with the League for approximately 3 years, and quite frankly, since day one, I was told from my superiors that I had to get a handle on the pension issue, understand it, be able to communicate it to our councils and city staff. And quite frankly, it really is an issue that I can wholeheartedly say you are certainly not alone. As we'll get into in the slides, most every city in California is facing similar situations. And what I like to always open up with and say that, you know, councils want to try to find innovative ways to improve their communities, you know, improve their roads, increase business opportunities, you know, clean air, you know, more parks and ways that we can enjoy our way of living. Quite frankly, you know, my take on it, my worldview is None of that can really be possible unless you attack this issue, which is going to be continuously increasing over the next 5 to 10 years, particularly in a sharp increase in the next, by fiscal year 24, 25, as we'll get into. So what we can do is try to arm our councils with the tools that they know how to communicate this to their constituents, they know how to understand and communicate this with their city staff, and really be good advocates to their state legislative representatives, because we certainly need all the help we can get at the state level on this issue. So I'll go ahead and just jump right in. Let's see, there we go. So, why are cities in the front line? I think one of the biggest misnomers in California politics today is that there really is no pension issue. And I think one of the biggest challenges is that cities are in the front lines because we really do have an issue, more so than counties, more so than special districts, and certainly more than the state. A couple of reasons here. Cities do provide significantly the most direct services, and so we have the most overhead and most staff. We do face significant revenue issues with declining tax bases, contribution increases to CalPERS, and of course a market slowdown, which is contributing to those increased rates. Cities receive little to no revenue from the state. Redevelopment is gone, so that's another avenue that we used to have as far as revenue is concerned, and so it's incumbent upon local governments, cities specifically, to try and make those ends meet. City officials are also closest form of government, so you guys do I say the Lord's work. You get little praise but all the blame, and so I think for us, we are on the front lines because we are going to be impacted by this the most. And lastly, CalPERS likes to call themselves a long-term investor. They think about 30 years or 60 years ahead, but for cities, quite frankly, it's not about where the CalPERS fund's going to be in year 30 or year 60. It's from right now and how we can get past the next 20 years, because it's going to be very significant. So a quick recap on how the pension fund operates. I think a lot of people think, well, we're all in this together, right? The state of California, the 3,000 employers in the system, and in a sense, yes, that's true, because all of the contributions that we as our cities pay, the state pays for, all those monies are pooled to try and maximize the maximum investment return. However, apart from some rare circumstances, almost every city and every agency is individually pooled in the system. So each individual city, county, special district has their own individual funded status, meaning how much money they have on hand versus how much money they actually have to owe in retiree benefits. And so what happens, and as we have seen what's happened in Southern California, if an agency is unable to meet their minimum pension requirement, their pension payment requirement, and they in fact have to terminate, what happens is that the agency is taken out of that shared pool. They are put into what is known as the terminated agency pool, which is basically a bond account, so it's a very conservative investment. But what happens is that when you get moved into the terminated agency pool, those retirees have seen as much as a 70% reduction in their benefits. So if you put yourself in the place of a retiree and you say to yourself, you're relying on that pension benefit, and all of a sudden you get a note in the mail saying your pension benefit is now being reduced by 70%, that's a real possibility and a real challenge. And so when we think about ways of providing, services to our community, and especially to the folks who have dedicated their life to public service, we want to make sure those retirements are there for them. But unfortunately, the minimum payments are becoming so high for city government that it's a real possibility that we may have to reduce pension benefits for those retirees. And one thing I want to note on this slide, it's the last bullet with regards to what they call the discount rate. I know that Ms. Merchant spoke about the discount rate. What the discount rate is it is the projected rate that CalPERS has to be able to meet in order to meet what they call the pension dollar. So we'll talk a little bit about the pension dollar and what that means. Every retirement dollar that gets paid out, it's based on a formula, and they have to hit that exact investment return in order to meet CalPERS's share of the bargain. So I wanted to go through a whole sort of
Can we ask questions as we go? The benefit reductions are assessed at 4% discount rate. I'm just wondering what that means.
Okay, perfect. Happy to talk about that. So right now, the current discount rate, which means the rate of return that the CalPERS has to hit, is for cities 7.375%. And so if your city right now is currently 65% funded, meaning they have 65 cents on the dollar for every dollar that has to be paid out, that's assessed at a 7.375%. So when you get moved out of what they call the PERF, the Public Employees Retirement Fund, and into the TAP, the Terminated Agency Pool Fund, they assess your liability at 4%. That means that your funded status goes from 65% down into the 40s, which means that your retirees will see a 60% reduction in benefits as opposed to a 40% reduction in benefits had you, stayed in the PERF and continued making your payments. So I wanted to go through more of a longer timeline, but really the short end of it is this: there's really a couple of real silver bullets that put us in this situation of where we're at now. I think one of the most significant things that we have to look at, and I by the way, I say this to tell you that I was raised in a union household. I am super pro police and all that good stuff, and so I know sometimes I get grief that I'm calling out public safety and specifically, but really there is the data tells us that public safety is one of the biggest draws off of our budgets. And so when you look at a bill that was passed in the year 2000, it was Senate Bill 400, and allowed a retroactivity credit to be applied to all public safety members. Local governments applied those same tiers locally. It wasn't a mandate, but it was something that was negotiated, and city governments sort of followed suit with the state and counties. But just some quick numbers here is that if you look at in 1999, if a police officer would have retired and pulled their papers to retire, they would have had about $62,000 a year in annual pension benefits. That's what they paid for. That's what they negotiated on. So the city paid that towards that amount, and the officer paid towards that amount. That same officer who paid towards that $62,000 pension, had they pulled their papers on January 1, 2000, would have automatically received $96,000 a year. So it's a retroactive benefit increase of about $34,000 in perpetuity. And so that right there, I think, just to show you some dollars, that's a pretty significant retirement increase because of those retroactivity credits. You combine that with the market turndown in 2008, 2009, it's a big issue because miscellaneous employees had similar retroactive benefits, but public safety really was the 3% at 50 formula was really significant. So when we talk about the discount rate, meaning that the rate that CalPERS must earn in order to meet their portion of the obligations, they have now lowered their discount rate, so what they believe that they're going to be earning over the next 30 years. What they did, though, was they phased that in over a certain period of time to try and allow employers to adjust their budgets. But the problem is that when you look at this timetable, by fiscal year 24-25, that's really when we're going to see the significant uptick in contributions. And so as Ms. Merchant mentioned, that over the last 3 years, your pension contributions have doubled. Quite frankly, by the time we get to fiscal year 24-25, they're likely going to double again because CalPERS is only going to be earning 7%. And if they're earning 7%, that means that the employer has to come up with the difference of what they were previously supposed to earn. And so I show you this because, and I put it in red there, because fiscal year 24-25 is really when we're going to see a significant spike in employer contributions. And so when I talk about discount rate, we look at what we call the pension dollar. Okay, so you look at it, this is a graphic directly from CalPERS. And so the way that they break down every dollar of retirement that is paid to a retiree, 59 cents of every dollar paid is through investment earnings. Excuse me, 28 cents of every dollar is paid by the CalPERS employer, so city, local government, the state. And 13 cents of that is paid by the employee. Now, this 59 cents only takes an effect if they hit their discount rate. So if they don't hit their rate of return, guess who is saddled with the difference? It's the employer. And so it doesn't go to the employee because there's statutory caps by state law that don't allow that 13 cents to go any higher. It does go up on the employer's side, varying on the amount that CalPERS is short on their investments. And so right now they're supposed to be earning 7.375% in order to meet their obligation of 59 cents on the dollar. On January 22nd, they announced a negative 3.25% return. So what is that going to do for our contributions we're going to see? Negative 3.25. Now, to be clear, cities operate on what they call a fiscal year, and so they've got till June 30th to try to make up that negative 3.25%. But the first 6 months aren't looking so hot as far as their ability to invest and make that required investment amount to be able to get their 59 cents of the dollar. And so all the actuarial reports that you're seeing and that you're looking on, that's predicated on them meeting their discount rate. So my thing, and I share this with your staff, is that anything that your actuarial reports are saying, it's actually worse than what your reports are saying. And one of the things that's also going to be a significant challenge as we move forward is because the way that a pension fund operates is that we need to have employees in the system paying in to the system. Well, because contribution, it's this cycle that we go through, right? The contributions are going up, forces cities to have to reduce their workforce. Therefore, so we can make the minimum payments, but then contribution rates go up again. We don't have the same workforce, and so we have to ask our employees to pay more. And I don't want this to come off as that, that the employees aren't doing their fair share, because they certainly are. What I'm saying is that everyone has to tighten down and everyone has to be able to try to increase their payments to ensure that we can meet that minimum contribution amount. And so what the numbers here say, according to CalPERS directly, is that in 2001, there were about 2 active employees for every 1 retiree. This year, in 2018, there was about 1.25 active employees for every retiree. And according to CalPERS, in the next 10 to 20 years, they project about a half a active worker paying into the system for every 1 retiree retiring and receiving benefits from the system. And so when you look at that, it's a significant challenge because now you have half a workforce paying for the retirees that have already retired.
It's specifically related to the baby boomers all going into retirement.
Yeah, I mean, we've seen a significant spike in retirees. You have about 25,000 new retirees every year from the CalPERS system. And quite frankly, again, not only are you seeing folks retiring, you're seeing cities and counties and special districts have to reduce their workforce simply because they can't afford to keep them on the payroll. So it's multifaceted.
So it's a reduced workforce too.
Correct. That half a worker is the projected active workforce working and paying into the system as we move forward. So, and I see now that I didn't do a good job formatting and it's bright green, so I'm glad you guys have copies. So the current status of the fund and where we're at right now. So in fiscal year 17-18, CalPERS earned 8.6% on its money, which is good. We'd love to see them earn a little bit more, but 8.6% gives them they've made their number as far as that pension buck, because they had to earn 7.375%. They earned 8.6, so that's great. The challenge is, of course, as I said, their calendar year returns are negative 3.25%. We have had the largest economic boom in the history of the market, and yet the fund has only moved from 61% to 65%. And so experts warn that should the pension fund fall below 55% or so, really the debt is insurmountable and the pension fund could likely collapse, similar to what we've seen in the state of Illinois. So what we did as the League of Cities is we tried to, because of the narrative that is out there that there really is no pension problem, that we just need to, that there's nothing to see here. The League worked with our local governments to really express the message that while maybe the state is doing okay on its obligations, cities are on the front lines. We need to be able to really express that and express that to our lawmakers. So we conducted a study to try to show, on average, cities by county. So we didn't list out cities specifically, but we just did it by county. Total percentage of payroll in the next 5 to 7 years, as well as total percentage of general fund budget, to really demonstrate the challenges that we're having on the pension issue. We want to be able to tell our story to the legislature. We want to be able to share this information with the public so they're engaged and informed. So what we see here is that one of the key findings is that rising pension costs will require cities to nearly double their percentage of their general fund dollars that they pay into PERS. And so we've already seen it double once, as was shared by Ms. Merchant. We're likely to see that double again. And so, percentages range about 15% all over to 23% or more of it, the entire general fund budget. It's important to note that these figures don't include any sort of OPEB or retiree health. It doesn't include active payroll. This is literally the minimum payment that you have to pay to CalPERS in order to stay into the system. And so when we look at fiscal year 2006, 2007, you had about 10% on average of total general fund was about the average for cities, which is okay. You look at fiscal years 17, 18, this last year, that number went up to about 15 to 18% of general fund budget for cities across California, with again getting into the higher double digits, not something we want to see. And also keep in mind, this is also during the biggest run up in the stock market that we've seen in recent history. And what you'll see now by fiscal year 24-25 is that number going up significantly throughout the state. I think the most alarming statistic is about 10% of cities will see about an increase of, to about 23% or more of their entire general fund going to the minimum payment of CalPERS. Again, simply meeting the minimum contribution, not including healthcare, not including payroll or any sort of city operations. That's about 45 cities in the state. And again, if to put a cherry on top, this entire study was used with CalPERS's data, CalPERS's assumptions, and so if they don't meet their discount rate, these numbers go up. When we look at percentage of payroll, a majority of cities will pay about anywhere from 29% of their payroll for miscellaneous, to some employees paying about 50% by fiscal year 24-25 of their payroll going to PERS. So again, we asked the question, if we're looking at percentage of payroll today at 50%, and that is looking to, if you're already at 50% and by fiscal year 24-25 you add another 30 or 40%, how do you operate a department payroll if 80% of your entire budget is going to CalPERS as opposed to going to into the pockets of your employees? And again, these don't include healthcare costs. So when you're looking at this statewide heat map, it's broken down by county. Again, this is direct information from CalPERS. We did not make this up. We took it from them. We crunched numbers. Only thing we did was just take out city-specific information to show that story. So for miscellaneous employees, you'll see that the average by fiscal year 24-25 is going to be north of about 37.5% of payroll, additional 37.5% by fiscal year 24-25. Public safety is a little bit different, a little bit higher. So by fiscal year 24-25, about 51%, a majority of our respondents are set to pay about 51% more to over 91% of payroll. So 91 cents of every dollar that was going into the pockets of our officers are now going to PERS. That's money off the table. Again, does not include healthcare. And so when we look at, and I put the arrow there to say, the 60, the red, the 65% or more is really the average that we're going to be seeing in fiscal year 24-25. So most cities across California will be spending 65% or more of payroll on public safety alone for the minimum contributions made to CalPERS. Again, that 65 cents on the dollar that's off the table that it would be normally used for benefit enhancement raises, things of that nature. And so we think about, we talk about the discount rate reduction. CalPERS also shortened what they call their amortization period. So now think about it this way, your debts that you were supposed to pay over 30 years are now going to be paid over 20 years. So if I have a 30-year mortgage and all of a sudden I get a letter in the mail saying, wait, we cut your mortgage to 20 years, what's that going to do to your monthly mortgage payment? And so that is one of another thing that we're going to be dealing with as far as how we can figure out how to survive the next decade or so. Because CalPERS has said that over the next 10 years, they are projecting to earn 6.1% on average, but they're supposed to be earning 7.375, 7.25, and then 7% for the foreseeable future. And so we already know that's going to be a shortcoming if CalPERS's projections are correct. And so, what can cities do today? I know this is very text heavy. I'm trying to kind of fly through it, and so we can have time for questions. What can cities do today? We say prepay, and hey, prepay if you can. Every dollar that you put forward right now will save you exponentially in the future. So, for example, the state of California, Governor Newsom has just announced that he would like to put a $3 billion prepayment towards the state's liability. Now, this is very important. That $3 billion does nothing for cities. Not one dime that goes to cities, not one dime that's going to impact our pensions. It helps the state's pool, their share, but nothing for cities. But it's going to save $7.2 billion for the state over the next 30 years. And so that's a big commitment from the governor that understands there is a pension issue. Quite frankly, we're working with his team to really let him know that cities would love to have some of that revenue as well. But for now, he's worried about the state of California's pool. A 115 trust is a great move to make. It locks dollars in. It will help stabilize your rates as they go up. You can draw off those rates, or draw off that pension, that 115 trust, to meet your minimum payments. When you have a local 115 trust, so if you set up with a private company, the council, the staff has full authority to be able to invest that money how they see fit to maximize returns. So you could even out-earn what PERS is making. PERS has a very conservative mindset on how they're allocating their investments. And the reason why is because they're only 65% funded. They can't afford to take risk. So they have to go by inches and just try to earn as much money as possible, but by being as conservative as possible. Because if they go into the 50s, quite frankly, it could be game over. And so they don't have the luxury of being aggressive. Whereas if a city wanted to establish a 115 trust, they can throw those dollars in and earn money, as opposed to it sitting in a discretionary fund where it's not earning any money. And so that is of course a viable option.
Dane, may I ask a question?
Certainly.
So is there a PARS 115 trust?
PARS does have a 115 trust. There are other companies out there, but PARS is probably the most well known. They can come in and do a presentation. CalPERS has a 115 trust as well. They've just established, similar to the one they have for OPEB. However, they don't have the flexibility to customize the way you would want to see your money invested. Whereas if you work with PARS, they give you a series of options. They'll work with your finance team and come up with a plan to maximize your investment while still maintaining a low level of risk. So you have more flexibility when you keep the 115 trust locally.
Are there administrative fees on the PARS also, or is it set up like the PERS is going to be set up?
That's the difference. So PARS does have an administrative fee. I don't want to say what it is out loud because I don't want to be wrong, but I do know that it would take about 0.25 of 1% is what CalPERS essentially would use for administrative cost, where PARS may be a little bit higher. But again, from what I have been told, what other cities are doing, they like working with PARS because you can anything that you're earning, it mitigates their administrative fee. So it ends up being cost neutral on the administrative service side, while at the same time earning more than what you would be earning by putting your money with CalPERS. But if the administrative cost is something that's important to the council, it's certainly something worth exploring. A couple of other options I'll touch on, and then I'm out of your hair, and I'm happy to answer questions. There are, quite frankly, education is key. So when you look at your actuarial reports, it is page 5 of your report. But again, the problem with your actuarial reports is that it assumes that CalPERS is hitting their discount rate every year, which they're not. And it assumes that they don't build in any likely future losses. And so when CalPERS brings their experts up and says, hey, we believe the way your funds are allocated right now, we're projecting a 6.1% return over 10 years, cities are on the hook for that other percent. And to put that in perspective, that 1% difference is a significant increase in your unfunded liability. And so 1% here, 1% there doesn't sound like a lot, but quite frankly, it's quite a bit. And so what I've always told people is that when you look at your actual reports, scratch your head and say, okay, it's actually worse than this. And if you actually work with your regional actuary, they can run different scenarios for you and say, well, if we only earn 6%, this is what your rates will be. If we only earn 5%, this is what your rates will be. So it gives you, it can prepare staff for whatever the rate is. And so we'll find out June 30th what they end up coming with. They've got 6 months now, or I guess less than 6 months, to make up that negative 3.25%. But you know, it's a tough road. It's a tough road to get there. Oh, and one last thing, something that I thought was very interesting is, well, there's a couple things. One, you know, you can always negotiate, if you can try to negotiate higher contributions from your employees. You know, the employee share is capped, but employees can pay towards the employer share. And again, it's not, you know, these are the toughest decisions that have to be made at the local level. So I don't say it lightly, saying, oh, just go ahead and negotiate. It'll be fine, right? I get that it's, you know, it's certainly going to be a challenge. That's why we want to try to arm our councils and quite frankly, our bargaining units with the information so everyone's on the same page. So you can really see the numbers and understand this is a necessity. This isn't something that you guys, you know, consider, you know, very light as far as asking them to pay more. Another, you know, review service and staffing models. A lot of cities are starting to look at looking at regional approaches to service delivery. I shared with your finance staff earlier that there's 3 cities in the North Bay that just established a fire joint powers authority. Each city is now saving $1 million a year, and they didn't have to lay off a single firefighter. It's the San Mateo Consolidated Fire Authority. So I worked with them and helped them get their contract approved through CalPERS for retirement services. It's a way that, again, labor was on board, management was on board. They're all saving $1 million a year. It was, you know, it truly was a win-win for everybody. So I know that you guys have a contract with the county, but it could be something that you could look at moving forward as far as approaching services regionally. That was actually a huge win for us because CalPERS has been very, very reticent about approving new joint powers authorities for retirement services. We were able to negotiate with them and establish a cost sharing for unfunded liabilities between all 3 cities. They signed off on it, and actually February 4th they had their swearing-in ceremony, and they're up and running, and things are doing great. So it was a way for each city to save about $1 million a year while not having to lay off a single employee. So it's certainly something I would encourage you to take a look at, and I'm happy to, at this point, I have one more thing. You know, this is just like the warm and fuzzy stuff. You know, we want to try to educate our councils and our staff as best as possible. We want to collaborate with our local unions. We want to collaborate with our statewide labor unions, with our elected officials at the state level to try and see if we can't come up with other solutions statewide that can provide some relief. And then communication. You know, we need, you know, what do these numbers mean for the jobs in your community, for the quality of life in your community? The more that you can make this real to your state legislator, the more they're going to understand that this is something that can't wait. Because what we are fearful of is we are going to have 40 or 50 cities go bankrupt, and then the state will say, oh, there's a problem, we should probably fix this. We don't want to see that happen. We would love to try and be proactive as best we can to try to come up with a collaborative solution with state government to see if we can't find alternative methods to provide some relief so cities don't have to go through the pain of going through bankruptcy or insolvency throughout that. So with that, again, thank you for, I'm sure I probably went over in time a little bit, but I appreciate the indulgence, and I'm happy to answer any questions.
Thank you. Councilmember Thorpe.
I just have a quick question about 115 Trust. So we're a big city, the second largest city in Contra Costa County, and we don't have the kind of budget that, you know, Concord has, or Richmond for that matter. And so help me. So some of us get anxiety when we think about 115 Trust and locking money away, because when the downturn happens, we then can't shuffle money around when we need to pay the police department, we need to keep city services going. And so the idea of having a fund sitting there that we can't get to, meanwhile we got to keep giving people services, is a big thing. We have like a $59 million budget. Again, that's nominal compared to the rest of the cities in Contra Costa County. How do you help council members get through the heartburn and anxiety?
Yeah, no, I totally get and understand where you're coming from, and quite frankly, hey, like I've told my state lawmakers and how I tell all of my members, the folks sitting at this dais are the ones that have to make the hardest decisions. And so, it's easy for me to say, hey, just go ahead and throw money aside. I'm not the one that has to be held accountable for that afterwards. So I tell you that if you talk to your regional actuary, you talk to the folks at PARS, and you talk to these financial experts, what they'll tell you is that every dollar that you throw into a 115 trust and you lock up, that is money that you are saving on the back end that's exponential. And so if you can earn money in that 115 trust and take that, especially when those contributions begin to rise and you have to, either way, you're going to have to make exponentially large payments. There's one way that you can say, okay, look, for the sake of argument, I don't have your numbers in front of me, so I'm making this up. Okay, our payments are increasing by 30% over the next 5 years. How are we going to be able to retain our workforce? Well, we're going to be able to pull enough money from that 115 trust because it's been sitting there, it's been earning money. We're able to pull from that to be able to meet our minimum payments so we can continue to provide retirement services and retain employees without laying them off. So in a way, what you're doing is you're taking money, but what that money is going to eventually go to the employees because it's going to pay for their retirement. So, that is something that, when you think about, gosh, this is a lot of money that we're thinking about, stowing away into our 115 trust. When those payments start going up, you're going to have to pull money or reduce services anyways. So rather pull money from a pool that's earning a significantly higher amount than sitting in a discretionary fund to be able to meet those payments to retain those services, than not earn those dollars, essentially losing the potential to, anywhere from 6, 7, 10% that you could be making, and you're just, you're paying as you go.
Right. And I appreciate that. And I know I've been one of the more resistant people to 115 trust. So I'll say that I appreciate what you've said, and I appreciate your presentation overall. So I'll just leave it at I'm more interested than I was maybe a few months ago when you brought it up. Yes. But I'm interested. I'm not committed, but I'm interested. That's all right. So thank you.
Is that a motion? No, I'm just kidding. I'm totally kidding. I'm kidding.
Questions I have, so from a staffing standpoint, right, what you shared was basically for every 4 employees, cities are now down to 2, right? We've cut our workforce in half. And over the next 10 years, you think we're going to cut our workforce in half again.
Correct.
And so basically, cities are running their cities on 50% less workforce now, and again, 50% less workforce 10 years from now. And some cities, you're saying, are paying 90% of their payroll into retirement.
Correct.
Right? How are those cities going to make it? Because they haven't hit the next 5 years where it's going to double. I don't see how those cities can put enough money into a 115 trust to survive. So how are those cities going to survive, and what's going to happen?
I'll tell you, it's you're not going to love the answer, but quite frankly, cities are looking at it. We had, I believe, the highest number statewide of local tax measures that were approved this year. So there's identifying new revenues. There is assessing staffing levels and the ability whether you have to contract out or approach services regionally, reducing services. Quite frankly, it is going to be a very difficult next decade, and it is every city has to assess their own responsibilities and obligations and how they operate their city on their own. But I can tell you overall, when I see some of these cities that right now are already paying 90% of payroll, I don't know the answer to that question. The only answer at this point would be more revenue.
What percentage of cities do you think will end up going to the terminated agency pool over the next 5 years as this doubles?
I'm not an actuary, and I'm not a finance director, so I don't want to speculate. I can tell you that in talking with the California Municipal Finance Officers Association, we're talking with GFOA, the Government Finance Officers Association, the Federal Association, and talking to actuaries, when you're looking at 24% of your entire general fund, it's a big red flag. I mean, it's I didn't mention this to compare apples and oranges. When you look at the minimum payment for CalPERS for cities, averaging that 23% or more going to for the minimum payment, when you assess the state, and this is according to the California state budget of 18, so I didn't look at the numbers this year, but last year, when you look at the state of California's total CalPERS contributions, total UC system contributions, CalSTRS contributions, plus all of the healthcare associated with that, it makes a combined total of 8% of their budget, as opposed to a minimum payment of one line item for cities, which is north of 23%. So again, that is the message I'm trying to convey to state lawmakers, because really, we're not in the same luxury as the state.
Now, question on the 115 trust. You put that money away, it's locked up, right? We have a rate stabilization fund that's really kind of doing the same thing. We set money aside, it's there basically as these goes up. Had we put money into 115 trust, in order to beat 7%, you're playing the stock market.
Correct.
Had we done that last year, we'd be down almost 4%.
Depending on your asset allocation.
Right? I mean, most mutual funds were down because of the last quarter of last year, heftily. And over the course of the last year, we're down. From a calendar year, we're down.
Yep.
Which means even 115 Trust lost money, because in order to beat 7%, you're probably in riskier things than CalPERS was. So it doesn't guarantee a rate of return of over 7%.
Nope, you're completely correct. Which is exactly why when you work with your local agent, they will assess. They'll give you the projections. They'll let you and the finance staff assess your own asset allocation to where you think is going to be the best for your own city. So it does give you the most control. But to your point, you're absolutely correct. I can tell you though, over the last 10 years, these local 115 trusts have been earning double-digit returns, whereas CalPERS has only earned 0.61%, 6%, 7%. So. Historically, these smaller funds that are more nimble, they have the potential of earning significantly more over the long haul, because where CalPERS is, as I mentioned, because their asset allocation, they're restricted. Really, they can't go any riskier because of how low their funded status is. And so you do have more flexibility through 115 Trust, but there is risk in any investment, even the bond market. There's technically risk, and so yes, you make a certainly fair point.
And we're looking at potentially by 2024, 25, Don, if he's right and we're doubling, right, by 24, 25, we're probably 17 million. We're at 8 million, 8.5 million by 2021.
Yeah, it's definitely a possibility. As I know I have told you, it's kind of like a shot in the dark. We went up $10 million in liability in 1 year. So, I've alluded to the fact that the numbers that PERS provide us seem to change every year. And you can even just see for 2021, our safety rate's almost 72%. And I know last year I'd provided a table because CalPERS put this nice little spreadsheet together that we're going to be well over, close to 85% beyond that in a few years, just for the safety portion, alluding to what Dane said about safety being much more expensive. So, it's definitely on the horizon for us. And as he said, it's very volatile. And so it definitely is worse than what they tell you, because they project, I believe, a little bit rosier of a picture than what happens.
And my last question is, from the standpoint of prepay, help me understand. If this is a credit card and I prepay it, I'm saving interest in the long term.
Correct.
This isn't going up because of interest. This is going up because we're not getting the amount of return that we hoped that we would get.
Yes, but even if you look at it from sort of like a zero-sum game, regardless of what happens, those rates are going to go up. So sometimes it's a daunting task when you prepay. I've had cities say, Dane, I prepaid $5 million last year, and my unfunded liability still grew by $1 million. And I go, yeah. But had you not paid that $5 million, your liability would have grown by $9 million. Yeah, so yes, it's.
But that's my question: is because you paid $5 million, did it cut the amount that it would have grown?
Correct.
And how?
Because when you're prepaying for your minimum contribution, you're paying more towards the whole of your unfunded liability, and so you're paying it essentially, earning. And I'm for sake of argument, I'm just making this up, but if you're paying 7% interest on $1 million is more than 7% interest on $750,000. And so when you're paying down, you're dropping your balance, and when you're in your fiscal year, when they assess what your unfunded liability is, they're assessing you at the 7.375 discount rate. So if you're prepaying now, yeah, you're paying interest on 7.375%, but in your analogy, the credit card, you're paying less on that credit card, on interest, because you paid principal down a little bit early, as opposed to waiting for the bill to come and paying that higher interest rate.
But they don't know what the principal is.
That is, yeah, that's
where I'm having trouble. If there was a principal, you tell me I owe you $200 million.
It's
I
not
pay down
fixed.
$5 million. I get that. That makes sense to me. I'm going to save on that $5 million in perpetuity. You don't know what the principal is.
Think about it like a variable rate. It's like a variable rate loan.
Except you don't know what the top number is that you're being charged interest on.
Oh, that's true. That is absolutely true. I'm not gonna.
It's not the same. I mean, it's just not the same. If it's a house payment, and I know I own $400,000, I know if I put $100,000 in, I only owe $300,000. I'm going to save in perpetuity on interest, right?
Correct.
But if my house payment is $400,000 and I put $100,000 in, and next year you tell me I now own $600,000 because I was off on my guesses, I have no idea what the top number is, and it keeps changing.
But what they'll tell you is that they will provide you a number saying, this is how much your unfunded liability would have gone up had you not paid that dollar amount. So you would be able to, solve, y equals mx plus b or something. I don't know. You'd be able to solve for x, and that's how much you're saving by prepaying. And it's not, when you look at these numbers, they're not encouraging, but they're when you really analyze them, it is the best thing you can do within the confines of current law is prepay. Now, what we'd like to do, we'd like to get lawmakers to the table with statewide labor organizations, with retiree groups, and think about other alternatives to try and reduce that unfunded liability that continues to grow. But until we have that groundswell approach, until we have the momentum to have those conversations, I'm providing the best counsel I can as far as what you can do within the confines of current law.
Thank you.
And
Mayor Pro Tem Motz.
I just think what you said right there is really the only action that can possibly take place. This is untenable. I mean, you're asking, a city that already is running as lean and mean as it possibly can, and providing not the kind of service that our citizens deserve. I mean, it just doesn't make any sense until somehow a lot of people and legislators come together and make some decisions on how we're going to fix this. Because the reality is that, I feel like we're throwing pennies. I mean, just wasting money at a dollar figure that's, we never know what it's going to be or what it's going to be next year. It's just, like I said, it's just untenable. It makes no sense absolutely to me. And we need legislators that are going to start looking at this and figuring out how we're going to.
No, I completely agree. And so like I've told your finance staff, and what I've been telling all my members is that what I'm suggesting to my membership is, prepare for the worst and hope for the best. And I know that doesn't sound like the best answer in the world, but if you're doing everything right, you're prepaying, you're putting money in a 115 trust, you're trying to consolidate services and approach it regionally, because I believe there will be a time when we have to have this discussion, you are going to be in the best position possible to come out of it sooner and be able to get back to the way of life that you, as you said, your citizens deserve. And so being able to be prepared and have everything in line is only going to prepare you for when that big grand compromise comes. You're going to be much more suited to succeed and get out quicker than if you were to just simply take your foot off the gas and just wait for the state to come bail you out. Because I'll tell you, Governor Brown, who is no longer here, but he was much stricter or much more open to these issues, has said, we're not bailing cities out because you guys negotiated these deals. And my response to him was, okay, well, when 50 cities go under, you're going to have to do something about it. And so my hope is that we avoid that.
Monica, any questions?
My comments to me, I really thank you for coming down today. I know it was a long drive for you,
No,
and I
no
really,
problem.
really appreciate you coming here and talking to staff and sharing this with the council. I'm not the best at explaining it, and you've done a phenomenal job. Our unfunded liability is not going away. it's going to be there. So if you have that PARS 115 trust and you have those funds going in it, from what you're saying, for us not to have to reduce staff, we will still be able to have possibly city services and not have to lay our employees off, which I don't want to do, to be able to pay our unfunded liability out of that 115 trust is huge to me, because then we're being fiscally responsible with our money. We have $4 million that we put in a stabilization fund that's used as, it could be used as discretionary funds. It's sitting there. So why not take that $4 million and put it into a PARS 115 trust, knowing that it can't just be used at a council's whim, not saying that this council would, but in 2 years, another council, that those funds could be sitting there not making the kind of money that it could be making. And then in 24, 25, all of a sudden we need these funds. They're not here. We're going to go back to recession time and laying people off. That's not what I want to set us up for. That's setting us up for failure. And if we can do anything that we can to put money away to pay down this debt. And can you explain, though I did try to explain it, so if we have a 30-year amortization, I don't know where we are in the, what year we're in. Do we know yet what year we're in paying it?
If you look at the staff report on
4 years.
and then go to page 2, you can see where they, from the PERS actual reports, I've gotten the amortization end dates for the unfunded liabilities for our different plans. So our soonest one is projected at this point to end in 2030. With the farthest one out 2046 for the classic safety, which is
So
our
it means
legacy.
that, to me, that means that we're in 4 years into that amortization. So can you explain why after 10 years, what happens when we've been paying on the 10 years of that 30 years?
Yeah, so the reason why CalPERS decided to modify their amortization schedule from 30 years to 20 years is because for the first 7 to 10 years on a 30-year schedule, your minimum payment doesn't even cover the interest. And so when you're paying, they did the 30-year amortization schedule when the market crashed and people were losing their mind and we thought, like the world's on fire. And so they gave a 30-year amortization period. What they have done since then is now if you're on the same schedule that you are right now, it's ending at 30 years. You as a council, you have the option to go back to PERS and say, we want to take what we've been paying on a 30-year and reduce it to 20. Your payments are going to go up, but you're going to save money in the long term. That you have that authority right now. You can keep everything as is, but what you don't have the choice on at this moment is starting July 1, this new fiscal year, all gains and losses are now set to a 20-year prospectively. For the next, for 20 years. So the challenge is when you're looking at market returns over the next 10 years, when you're looking at the phasing of the discount rate by fiscal year 24, 25, and when you're looking at a shorter amortization period, gains and losses are going to be much more volatile. And when CalPERS says they're only going to earn 6.1% over the next 10 years, you're paying that difference over a 20-year period as opposed to a 30-year period. Granted, when you're making those payments, you're actually chipping into principal as opposed to a 30-year, but they are going to be more volatile and higher. Now, I know staff talked about perhaps a fresh start. A fresh start would essentially lock you into a 20-year rate for all of your previous gains and losses. I think the idea, you know what, I'm going to hold personal comment because I'm not a finance director, so I'm not going to go there. But it is something that if you did reduce your previous unfunded liabilities that have already accrued over 20 years, your rates would go up, but you would be chipping into that interest or in that principal a heck of a lot faster. But starting next year, you're not going to have the choice. All future gains and losses are on a 20-year.
And the other thing is people don't invest for a short time period.
Correct.
So we invest for a long time period because we know the market is volatile. It does go up, but it does rebound and then it does go on the higher side. So it's a long-term investment that you're looking at, not a short-term.
Right. And, define benefit plans in general. The challenge is that, unlike your personal investments, your mutual funds, when the stock market crashed in 2008, 2009, the value of your stocks may have dropped by 50%, but you didn't take money out, you stayed, and you kept putting money in. And so now 2018 comes and you've rebounded. Now you've got 150% more than you had back in 2008, 2009. However, with the pension fund, they are paying out $20 billion a year in retirement assets. So even when they lost 27% in the height of the recession, they made 18% the next year. Well, that entire 18% got washed out because they had to pay benefits to retirees. And so the pension fund is in a much different space than your traditional investments, which is why in the last 10 years, when we've seen this market ramp up, they've only gained 4% of ground. And so it is, when CalPERS talks, they say, look, we're a long-term investor. And what I continuously say to them is, as I say, you make a critical assumption that my cities can pay it. And that is something that if you ever want to come up and testify in front of a CalPERS, I love having a crew with me, but you see in my videos or my testimony to CalPERS, I'm very direct with them and really letting them know just how much of a struggle it is for my cities to make those minimum contributions. And so it is something that we're going to continue to work on.
And last year was the first year that this started with CalPERS hearing from city officials, correct?
About last 18 months or so. Yeah, that's. Quite frankly, management was absent from the table at CalPERS for a long time. I think all of us didn't really want to face the problem, but now we're getting to the point now where we have no other choice but to take a look and say, how do we figure out a way to work together on this? And so I can tell you we have established a phenomenal relationship with most of the CalPERS board members, CalPERS executive staff. They've got a phenomenal executive team now in place. They want employers in the room. They want to see if they can make something work. The next step is working with local labor, with state labor, with retiree groups in the administration on perhaps some remedies that can help provide some relief for our cities.
I want to thank you again. Thank you, Dane.
Absolutely.
Dane, thank you for coming. Great presentation, really timely, and something that we will continue to look at as we go through the budget.
Great.
So
Thank you so much.
I appreciate it. We will adjourn, take a 5-minute break, and start at 7:05. Well, I'd like to welcome everybody out to the Antioch City Council meeting this evening. Thank you all for joining us. Invite our city manager to come on up and join us.